The black mud spread across the white tiles I had spent 3 hours polishing, gleaming like an open wound on my pride. I am Ruth. I am 70 years old, and I used to own the most demanding dry cleaner in the city. But my daughter-in-law just made the mistake of forgetting who actually signs the deed to this house. I have always believed that the floor of a house says a lot about the people who live in it. If it is dirty, there is chaos in the mind. If it shines, there is order in the spirit. That is why, ever since I retired, and my son Robert insisted so much that I come live with them in this colonial-style estate in Pasadena, I took the liberty of keeping things in order. Not because they asked me to, but because my hands, accustomed to hard work since I was 15, do not know how to stay still. That morning had been especially gray. The rain had been beating against the glass since dawn, one of those storms that wash the streets but muddy the mood. I got up at 5, as is my habit. At that hour, the house breathes a silence that belongs only to me. I brewed the coffee, that dark roast with a pinch of cinnamon my late husband loved so much, and I got to work. The house is big, too big for 3 people and a cat that ignores me. It has marble floors in the entryway and fine hardwood in the living room. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, always says that domestic help is inefficient, so 2 months ago she fired the girl who used to help out. "You are here all day, Ruth. Why spend money on strangers?" she told me with that little smile that never quite reaches her eyes. Since then, I am the one who cleans. I do not complain about work. Work brings dignity, my father used to say, but there is a difference between working for dignity and working in servitude. That day, my hip hurt more than usual. The dampness seeps into my joints like an unwanted guest. Even so, I didn't leave a single speck of dust. I moved the heavy green velvet armchairs, the ones Chloe bought at an Italian design store, that are as uncomfortable as sitting on a rock. I scrubbed the baseboards with an old toothbrush to get the grime out of the corners. I waxed the wood until you could see your reflection and count your wrinkles on the floor. By 11 in the morning, the house smelled of lavender and fresh wax. I sat for a moment in the kitchen, my hands red and cracked from the cold water, feeling that quiet satisfaction of a duty fulfilled. I looked at my hands. These hands had ironed thousands of shirts. They had counted dollar bills until dawn to build my business. They had changed Robert's diapers. They are strong hands, even if they have age spots now. Then, I heard the engine. Chloe arrived early. She was supposed to be at her gardening club or the gym, those places she goes to de-stress from doing absolutely nothing. I heard the electric gate, the engine cutting off, and then the heavy thud of the front door opening. "Disgusting weather," she yelled from the entryway. I stood up from the kitchen chair, smoothing my apron, ready to offer her a dry towel or a cup of tea. I walked into the foyer. The scene I saw froze my blood faster than the wind blowing through the open door. Chloe was standing right in the middle of the entryway. She was wearing those high, thick-soled designer boots, covered in a thick, sticky mud, the kind that forms in gardens when it pours. She hadn't wiped them on the welcome mat. She hadn't even tried. She had walked with a firm step, leaving a trail of black, pasty footprints across the immaculate white marble I had finished polishing barely half an hour ago. She just stood there looking at her phone, typing rapidly, ignoring my presence. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice soft, trying to maintain my composure. "I just cleaned the floor. Please, take off your boots at the door." She looked up. Her eyes, lined with surgical precision, looked me up and down with a mix of boredom and disdain. There was no guilt in her gaze, no shame, only arrogance. She took another step inward, dragging her soul on purpose, smearing the mud further, spreading the stain as if she wanted to sign her masterpiece over my hard work. "Oh, mother-in-law," she let out a dramatic sigh, shoving her phone into her designer bag. "Don't start with your obsessions. It's just a little dirt. It's not an obsession, Chloe. It's respect. It took me all morning to get this spotless." She let out a short, dry laugh, no joy in it. She took off her sunglasses, even though it was overcast outside, and stared right at me. "Look, Ruth," she said, her tone shifting. It wasn't casual anymore. It was sharp. "You spend all day locked up in here. What else do you have to do? You have no social life, no friends, no nothing. Cleaning is the only thing keeping you busy." I felt a heat rise up my neck. An old, familiar heat. It was the same heat I felt when suppliers tried to sell me cheap detergent, thinking I wouldn't notice because I was a woman, but I stayed completely still. "I am not your maid, Chloe," I said, my fists clenching at the sides of my apron. That was when she said it, the sentence that snapped the very last thread of patience I had left, the sentence that turned my sadness into a cold, calculating strategy. Chloe stepped closer to me, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and entitlement. She pointed at the muddy floor with a perfectly manicured acrylic nail. "Clean it again," she ordered, enunciating slowly as if speaking to a slow child. "You live here for free. You eat our food, you use our electricity, you bathe in our hot water. You need to work to earn what you consume. Don't be ungrateful." The world stopped for a second. The sound of the rain vanished. I only heard the beating of my heart in my ears. Boom, boom, boom. Free. That I lived here for free. I looked at the mud on the floor. I looked at her face, so satisfied to have put the old woman in her place. Chloe believed this house belonged to Robert. Robert, my son. The man who never had the courage to tell his wife that the comfortable life they led was not the result of his mediocre salary as a city architect, but of the wealth his father and I built over 40 years. Robert, out of shame or cowardice, had made Chloe believe the house was his, that he had bought it before they got married. And I, out of a mother's love, to avoid making him look bad, to avoid humiliating him in front of the woman he chose, had kept quiet. I let them live here. I moved into the guest room and let them take the master suite. I let Chloe redecorate, throw out my old furniture, paint the walls in trendy colors. I thought it was a noble sacrifice. I thought I was helping my son build his family. But hearing her say, "You live here for free," something broke inside me. It wasn't a violent explosion. It was more like the click of a padlock snapping shut forever. "Clean it again," I repeated in a whisper. "Yes, and make it fast. I have friends coming over for tea at 4, and I want the house presentable. Oh, and make some of those little sandwiches you're good at. But don't come out to say hi, please. You always start telling your dry cleaning stories and bore everyone to death." Chloe turned around and walked up the stairs, dropping clumps of mud on every wooden step. I heard her door slam shut. I was left alone in the foyer. I looked at the disaster, the black mud over the white tile. It was poetic. Somehow, that filth was the truth finally coming to light. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of dampness and Chloe's perfume, hanging in the room like a toxic gas. I untied my apron slowly, undoing the knot at my back with total calm. I folded it carefully, aligning the corners, and left it on the entryway table. I was not going to clean. Not today, not ever again. I went to my room, that small space on the ground floor that used to be my husband's study. I locked the door and walked to the closet. I didn't look for clothes. I looked for my leather handbag. The good one. The one I bought on a trip to Italy 15 years ago. The one Chloe always looked at with envy because they don't make them like that anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled a small fireproof safe from the bottom of the closet, hidden under a pile of knitted blankets. My fingers didn't tremble. I spun the dial. Right, left, right. The metallic click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Inside, there was no jewelry or cash. There were papers, documents with official seals, notary signatures, the legal history of my life. I pulled out the navy blue leather folder. I opened it just to verify everything was there. Public deed number 4528. Sole owner, Ruth Garcia, widow of Arthur. I ran my hand over the textured paper. I remembered the day we signed this. Arthur looked at me and said, "This is yours, Ruth. Whatever happens, this is your security." He knew I had a better head for business than he did. I closed the folder and slipped it into my bag. I changed my shoes. I took off my comfortable slippers and put on my low black heels, the polished ones I used to wear to the bank to negotiate loans when we expanded the business. I put on my gray wool coat, fixed my hair in the mirror, and applied a discreet red lipstick. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see the nuisance mother-in-law. I didn't see the woman who lived for free. I saw Ruth Garcia, the woman who negotiated with unions, who survived 3 economic crises, and who raised a family. That woman had been asleep. anesthetized by the desire to be a good grandmother and an understanding mother. But Chloe had woken her up with a pair of muddy boots. I walked out of my room. I passed through the foyer without looking at the dirty floor. I ignored the mud. I ignored the stairs leading to my daughter-in-law's kingdom. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the street. The rain had slowed to a fine mist that cooled my face. I walked down the wet sidewalk. The neighborhood is beautiful, with its tree-lined streets and historic homes covered in bougainvillea. My neighbors greeted me as I passed. "Good morning, Ruth. So elegant in this weather," the doorman from the building across the street asked. "I have an important errand, Henry," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "A matter of deep cleaning." I walked 2 blocks. My steps echoed firmly on the pavement. I didn't feel the pain in my hip. Adrenaline is a wonderful painkiller. I reached the corner. There it was, Oakwood and Associates Real Estate. A storefront with massive windows displaying photos of properties worth millions. I stopped in front of the glass door. I saw my reflection, a short, older woman clutching her bag to her chest. Anyone would think I was going in to ask about renting a small room. No one would imagine I was carrying the power to destroy my son and his wife's little fantasy world right in my purse. I pushed the door open. A bell announced my arrival. The inside smelled of machine coffee and pine air freshener. A young man in a tight suit with slicked back hair looked up from his desk. He gave me that quick visual assessment salespeople do. Does she have money, or is she going to waste my time? "Good morning, ma'am," he said, without standing up. "Looking to rent? We have some small apartments perfect for single individuals." I walked right up to his desk and dropped my bag onto the glass surface with a heavy thud. The sound made the young man blink. "I am not looking to rent, young man," I said, and my voice came out clear, powerful, with the commanding tone I hadn't used in 10 years. "My name is Ruth Garcia." I opened the bag, pulled out the blue folder, and slid it across the desk until it gently bumped his keyboard. "I am here to sell a house," I continued, looking him dead in the eyes. "An estate on Orange Grove Boulevard. 5,000 square feet, luxury finishes, almost newly polished marble floors." The young man's eyes went wide. He knew the street. He knew what those houses were worth. He jumped out of his chair, buttoning his suit jacket, his disdain transforming into instant servility. "Of course, Mrs. Garcia. Please, take a seat. Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "I don't want anything," I replied, sitting with my back perfectly straight. "I just want you to put up a for sale sign today, and I want it to be a big sign. Very big. I understand. Is the house currently occupied?" I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. "Yes, it is occupied by some precarious squatters, but don't worry about that. The deed says I am the owner, and I decide when the deal closes." While the young man began typing frantically on his computer, I looked out the window at the street. I pictured Chloe upstairs, trying on clothes for her tea party, thinking I was downstairs on my knees scrubbing her mud. She had no idea that with every keystroke this boy made, the ground beneath her feet was vanishing much faster than she had dirtied mine. "Are you in a hurry to sell, Mrs. Garcia?" the agent asked. "All the hurry in the world," I answered. "Let's just say I want to do a general cleaning before the week ends." The agent nodded, impressed by my determination. I stroked the leather folder. The submissive grandmother was gone. Ruth was back in business, and business, this time, was justice. The young real estate agent, whose name tag read Ethan, though he didn't look old enough to shave, typed at a speed that made me dizzy. I sat across from him, hands folded over my purse, watching his eyes dart across the screen. I could see the reflection of numbers in his glasses. Big numbers. Life-changing numbers. "Mrs. Garcia," he finally said, stopping the tapping of his fingers and turning the monitor toward me. "I have to be honest with you. I don't know if you're aware of the current market situation in Pasadena, but..." He took a dramatic pause. I didn't blink. "I didn't come here for an economics lesson, young man. I came to sell." "How much?" Ethan cleared his throat, intimidated by my tone. He adjusted his tie and pointed to a figure on the screen. "Considering the location, the square footage of the lot, and the colonial revival architecture, we are looking at a prime property. If we put it on the market today, with the area's appreciation, We could list it at $2.5 million, and it would probably sell in a bidding war. I stayed silent. 2.5 million. My late husband Arthur and I bought that lot when Pasadena still had dirt roads in that area, and mules carried firewood. It cost us blood, sweat, and tears to pay every cent of that mortgage with what we pulled from the dry cleaners. I knew the house was worth money, but hearing that number out loud, spoken so naturally, made something vibrate in my chest. 2.5? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Minimum. Could be more if the finishes are as good as you say. I nodded slowly. While Ethan printed out some forms and talked about commissions and exclusivity, I looked out the window. $2.5 million, and my daughter-in-law threw the hot water and electricity I used in my face. The irony was so massive it almost made me laugh. A bitter laugh, the kind that scrapes the back of your throat. Chloe paraded around my house like the Queen of England, humiliating me over a plate of food, completely unaware that she was walking on a gold mine that only needed my signature to detonate. I need to see the original deed and your ID to start the file, Ethan said, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled the documents from the blue folder. As I did, my fingers brushed against something hard at the bottom of my bag. It was my old Casio calculator. The gray, heavy one, with keys worn down from years of adding up invoices and payroll at the cleaner. I don't know why I had thrown it in there. Instinct, maybe. I took it out and placed it on the glass desk. Ethan looked at it strangely. It's my lucky charm, I said, turning it on. The LCD screen blinked with a sharp, black 0. To make sure the math always checks out. While the boy reviewed the notary seals, I started doing mental math. With that money, not only could I buy myself a luxury condo where no one could order me to clean, I could travel, I could invest, I could do whatever the hell I pleased. But then Ethan said something that changed the game entirely. Mrs. Garcia, I see a marginal note here on the deed. You hold a lifetime usufruct on an annexed commercial property, a storefront on the street behind the house. I froze. The old dry cleaning storefront. When we closed the business, we leased the space to a corporate American coffee chain. Robert was in charge of collecting that rent. Years ago, he told me the lease had ended, that the place was empty, generating nothing, and that property taxes were eating up whatever was left. That was why I depended on them for my personal expenses. Annexed? I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Yes, it's linked right here, and according to the county records, Ethan typed again. That commercial space is active and current on payments. In fact, it's leased to a very well-known franchise. The lease agreement is under the name Robert, end quote. The air was punched out of my lungs. Robert, my son, my own blood. Not only had they made me believe I was living on charity in my own home, my son had been collecting the rent from my commercial property, my retirement, my security, and he had been pocketing it this whole time. While I asked for a few dollars for my medication or to buy a pair of stockings, he was raking in thousands of dollars a month that legally belonged to me. Are you sure you want to sell the house with the commercial space included? Ethan asked, completely oblivious to the hurricane he had just unleashed inside me. Because the cash flow from the storefront increases the overall value considerably. I looked at the calculator. My fingers, old but wise, flew over the keys. Estimated rent for that area over 10 years, plus interest. The number that popped up on the Casio screen made me want to vomit. I had been robbed. Not by the government, not by strangers, by my own son and his wife. He with his complicit silence, she with her sheer audacity. They had turned me into a servant in my own kingdom, funding their luxury lifestyle with my own money, all while making me feel like a burden. Sell it all, I said, my voice cracking like a dry branch. All of it, the house, the storefront, the yard, even the shadows of the trees. I want it all in cash, and I want it fast. Ethan smiled, smelling his commission. Consider it done, Ruth, but I need to go take photos. When is a good time? I thought of Chloe and her 4 o'clock tea. I thought of her friends with their designer bags and fake little laughs. Tomorrow, I said. Go tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp. And Ethan, don't ring the bell. I will open the door for you. I want you to bring the biggest for sale sign you have. I walked out of the agency with the preliminary contract folded in my bag next to the calculator. It had stopped raining, but the sky was still overcast, lead gray, matching my mood. I walked back home, But this time I wasn't looking at the ground to avoid tripping. I walked with my head high, looking at the treetops, breathing in the damp afternoon air. During the walk, I allowed myself to feel, not rage. That would come later. I felt a profound disappointment. I remembered Robert as a little boy, clinging to my skirt while I helped customers at the dry cleaner. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a castle," he used to tell me. I worked double shifts to pay for his architecture degree. I gave him everything, and he paid me back with lies. He paid me back by letting me be the punchline to his wife's jokes. I stopped at a park near the house. I sat on a wrought iron bench, ignoring the fact that it was wet. I pulled out a tissue and wiped away a single tear that had escaped the corner of my eye. "You fool, Ruth," I told myself. "By not wanting to be the meddling mother-in-law, you became the doormat." I had confused love with submission. I had believed that surrendering control was the best way to keep the peace in the family. But peace built on lies isn't peace. It's a rigged truce. They had underestimated me. Chloe saw an old woman only good for scrubbing mud. Robert saw an elderly mother who didn't understand finance. They forgot who I was. They forgot that before I was the grandmother, I was the boss. They forgot that I negotiated with trucking unions before they were even born. They forgot that I know exactly how to get the toughest stains out, and treason is a stain you remove with pure bleach. I stood up from the bench. My joints ached, but the pain just reminded me I was alive. I looked down Orange Grove Boulevard. I could see the tile roof of my house in the distance. It wasn't their house anymore. It never was. It was my asset, my capital, and I was about to liquidate it. When I reached the gate, I saw several cars parked outside. Mercedes, BMWs, big shiny SUVs. Chloe's friends had arrived. I heard laughter coming from the indoor patio. I opened the door with my key. The foyer was still filthy. Chloe's muddy footprints had dried, turning into gray crusts on my marble. No one had cleaned it. Of course not. They were waiting for the maid to return. I walked toward the kitchen. On the granite island, there were trays of fine pastries. Store-bought, not homemade. Open bottles of champagne. "Ruth!" Chloe's voice echoed from the living room, shrill and demanding. "You're back." We ran out of ice. I walked into the living room. The scene looked straight out of a cheap society magazine. 5 women of indeterminate age, thanks to Botox, sitting on my couches with glasses in their hands. Chloe was in the center, presiding over the gathering like a queen on her throne. When they saw me walk in wearing my gray coat and carrying my old bag, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Her friends looked at me with that pity, disguised as sympathy, that rich people reserve for the poor and the elderly. "Oh, there she is," Chloe said, rolling her eyes. "Girls, this is my mother-in-law, Ruth. Meet my friends from the club." "Good afternoon," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was dry, cutting. "Mother-in-law, please be an angel and bring us more ice. And if you could, run a mop over the entryway." Marissa almost had a heart attack with all that dirt. The women let out nervous little laughs. I looked at Chloe. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing me. She saw another piece of furniture, a tool. She didn't see the owner of everything surrounding her. She didn't know that the roof over her head already had a price tag. She didn't know that the money she spent on that champagne was stolen from my account. In that moment, the contrast between what she believed and what I knew was an abyss. She thought she had the power because she was young, because she yelled, because she had her husband on her side. I had the power because I had the law, the money, and now, the truth. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one in a long time. "With pleasure, Chloe," I said. "I'll take care of the deep cleaning right this minute." I turned around and went to the kitchen. I didn't look for ice. I went straight to the drawer where we kept the tools. I pulled out a tape measure. I walked back to the foyer where the muddy footprints were. I got on my knees, but not to clean. I extended the tape measure and began measuring the width of the front door. I needed to know if the mahogany desk I planned to take to my new apartment would fit through the door without getting scratched. "What are you doing, ma'am?" asked one of Chloe's friends, who had come out to use the bathroom and saw me on the floor. "Measuring, dear," I answered without looking up. "Measuring the timeline." I stood up, put the tape measure in my pocket, and went to my room. I locked the door. The noise of the party sounded muffled, distant. I sat at my desk and pulled out the Casio calculator again, along with a notepad I had kept tucked away for years. I started writing. It wasn't a grocery list, it was a battle plan. 1. Inventory. Mark which furniture is mine. Almost everything of real value. The antiques Chloe despised and shoved into storage. 2. Movers. Call Gonzalez Transport. Old man Gonzalez passed away, but his son runs the business and owes me favors. 3. Bank account. Go first thing tomorrow to open a new account, solely in my name, where Ethan will wire the earnest money. 4. The final blow. Wait for Ethan to arrive tomorrow with the sign. I looked at the clock. It was 5 in the afternoon. Robert would be home by 7. Normally by this time, I would have dinner in the oven, his clothes ironed, and his slippers ready. Not today. Today the kitchen was cold. I took out my cell phone, a basic model Robert gave me for emergencies. I scrolled through the contacts. It had very few numbers. I dialed Robert's office. Architect Robert's office. His secretary answered. Hello, Lupita. It's Robert's mother. Mrs. Garcia. What a surprise. Do you want me to transfer you? He's in a meeting. No, don't interrupt him, dear. Just leave him a message. Tell him I'm not making dinner tonight. Tell him to pick something up on the way. Oh, sure, ma'am. Are you feeling okay? Better than ever, Lupita. Tell him I am doing inventory. I hung up. I felt a rush of adrenaline. It was a small gesture, insignificant to the world, but giant to me. It was the first time in 10 years I wasn't doing my duty. I lay back on the bed with my shoes on, hugging my purse to my chest. I could hear Chloe's heels upstairs, pacing back and forth. I imagined the floor beneath her feet turning transparent, fragile as glass. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, Ethan would knock on the door. Tomorrow, the for sale sign would be driven into the front lawn, right in the middle of Chloe's prize-winning hydrangeas. Tomorrow, my son and daughter-in-law's fantasy world would collapse. But tonight I would sleep peacefully. Because finally, after so much time in the dark, the math was checking out, and the final tally was going to be in my favor. I closed my eyes and listened to the rain start falling again. This time it didn't feel sad. It felt like the sky was clearing the path for what was coming. And what was coming wasn't just a real estate transaction. It was a revolution. Enjoy your tea, Chloe, I whispered into the shadows of my room, because it's the last one you're drinking in my house. The next morning lacked the usual aroma of roasted coffee and the rhythmic sound of a broom sweeping the patio. It dawned with a heavy silence, the kind that predicts a storm even when the sky is clear. I got up at 6. Not to serve, but to arm myself. I opened my closet and pulled out the navy blue tailored suit I wore to Arthur's funeral. It fit a little loose now, but with a good belt and the right posture, it still commanded respect. I smoothed my hair, pulling the silver strands into a tight bun, not leaving a single hair out of place. I looked in the mirror and didn't see the grandmother who bakes cookies. I saw the woman who, 30 years ago, fired 5 employees for stealing detergent without her hand shaking once. I stepped out of my room. The hallway was a battlefield from the night before. Crystal glasses with remnants of red wine stained the coffee table. Crumpled napkins littered the floor, and of course, the dried mud from Chloe's boots was still there in the foyer, standing like a monument to her insolence. I stepped right over a dirty napkin without picking it up. I felt a strange tingling in my fingers, the habit of cleaning begging to take control. But I clenched my fists and kept walking. I went to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the coffee maker. I didn't take out the eggs or the ham. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the head of the table, a spot Robert had claimed as his own since they moved in, displacing me to a more comfortable side chair. Today, the head of the table was mine. I took a thick, blood-red permanent marker and a pad of yellow sticky notes out of my purse. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard Robert's dragging footsteps coming down the stairs. He was in his pajamas, scratching his head with that overgrown boy face that never fully matured. "Morning, Mom," he yawned without looking at me, heading straight for the empty coffee maker. "What happened? Out of gas? Doesn't smell like coffee." "There's instant coffee in the pantry if you'd like," I replied without looking up from my notebook, where I was writing frantically. Dining set, mine. China cabinet, mine. Robert stopped dead in his tracks. Blinking, he turned his head and saw me sitting in his spot, dressed like I was going to a board meeting. "Are you going out?" he asked, confused. "Mom, remember the gardener is coming today. Someone has to let him in. Chloe and I are going out to breakfast with the Millers." "The gardener isn't coming, Robert. I canceled him." "What do you mean you canceled him? The grass is huge and Chloe hates when it looks neglected." "The grass is the least of our worries today," I said, slapping a yellow sticky note right in the center of the mahogany table. "This table is leaving." "What?" At that moment, the sharp clicking of Chloe's heels echoed on the stairs. She came down wrapped in a pink silk robe, wearing dark sunglasses even though we were inside the house. "Robert, tell your mother to keep the noise down. I have a splitting migraine," she complained as she walked into the kitchen. "And pour me some coffee, please." Chloe dropped into a chair, massaging her temples. When she opened her eyes behind the glasses, she noticed the cold kitchen, the unset table, and me, sitting perfectly upright like an ice statue. "Where's breakfast?" she asked with that tone of indignation spoiled children use. "The kitchen is closed for inventory," I said calmly. I stood up, took my red marker, and walked into the living room. Robert and Chloe exchanged weird looks. They followed me, curious and annoyed, like two lapdogs who don't understand why their owner hasn't given them a treat. In the living room, I stopped in front of the massive gold-framed mirror that had belonged to my grandmother. I slapped a large yellow note on the glass. With the red marker, I wrote a single letter, S, for sale. Then I walked over to the Italian leather sofa Chloe had bought with the credit card I was indirectly paying off. I slapped another note on it. 2, for trash. "Hey, what is wrong with you?" Chloe shrieked, totally forgetting her migraine. "That sofa is genuine leather. Why are you sticking paper on it? You're going to stain the hide." "I am categorizing, Chloe. What is mine and holds value, and what is yours and is just taking up space?" Taking up space? Robert stepped forward, trying to restore order with his man-of-the-house voice. A voice that was 3 sizes too big for him. "Mom, enough with these eccentricities. If you're mad about yesterday, I get it. Chloe was a little rude about the mud, but there's no need to act like this. Come on, take off that suit, put your robe on, and let's calm down. I'll make you some tea." I looked at him. I looked at my 45-year-old son, trying to manipulate me with pure condescension. "I don't want tea, Robert, and I am not mad. I am busy." Right then, the doorbell rang. 2 sharp professional knocks. I checked my wristwatch. 10 o'clock sharp. Ethan was punctual. I liked that. "Who is that?" Chloe asked, alarmed, pulling her robe tighter. "We aren't expecting anyone. Robert, don't open the door. I look a mess." I ignored her shouting and walked to the front door. I passed right by the dried mud again. This time, I saw it for what it was. The smoking gun. The evidence that justified my sentence. I swung the door wide open. Ethan stood there, impeccable in his gray suit, a folder tucked under his arm. Behind him was a man with a professional camera and tripod, and 2 young guys wearing shirts that said, Logistics Realty. "Good morning, Ruth," Ethan greeted with a respectful nod. "We are ready for the photo shoot and the quick walkthrough. Come on in, gentlemen," I said, stepping aside. "The house is all yours." The crew rushed in. The photographer started setting up his gear right in the middle of the dirty foyer, looking for the best lighting angles. The logistics guys pulled out laser measuring tapes and started scanning the walls, shooting red beams across the living room like sniper sights. Chloe let out a choked gasp. "Robert, get these people out of here," she yelled, backing up toward the stairs. "Who are they? What are they doing measuring my house?" Robert, pale as paper, marched up to Ethan. "Listen, buddy, I think there's a mistake. We didn't request any services. This is private property. I'm going to ask you to leave before I call the cops." Ethan looked at me, raising an eyebrow. I gave a slight nod. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan said, his voice smooth but firm, pulling a document from his folder. "I have a listing agreement signed by the legal owner, Mrs. Ruth Garcia. We are proceeding with the inventory for an immediate listing." "Listing?" The word fell out of Robert's mouth like a deflating balloon. "Listing what?" Chloe took 2 steps down the stairs, her eyes bulging. "What is this guy talking about, Robert? Tell him this is our house. I stepped toward them. I stood dead center, right between the strangers measuring my wealth and the family that had parasitized it. No, Chloe, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling, clear and booming. This was never your house. It was a loan. And the term of that loan expired yesterday when you decided I lived here for free. Dead silence fell over the room. It was broken only by the click click of the photographer's shutter immortalizing the crystal chandelier. Robert looked at me with a mix of sheer terror and disbelief. Mom, you can't be serious. Sell the house? Where are we going to go? Where are we supposed to live? That is something a successful architect and his high society wife should be able to figure out, don't you think? I replied with a coldness that surprised even me. You have a month. Well, less, depending on how fast it sells. And judging by how quickly this young man is taking photos, I think it will be very fast. Are you crazy? Chloe screamed, losing every ounce of composure. She ran down the stairs and got right in my face, red with rage. It's senility, Robert. Your mother has lost her mind. You can't sell this house. We put money into it. I painted the walls. I changed the curtains. And I paid the mortgage for 25 years. Chloe, I cut her off, taking a step toward her. She instinctively stepped back. I paid for every brick, every copper pipe, and even the marble you dragged mud across yesterday. You can take the curtains with you. I don't want them. They're tacky. Ethan cleared his throat, uncomfortable, but professional. Ruth, the photographer is asking if we can move that green sofa so he gets better light from the window. Of course. If it's in the way, put it out on the patio, I ordered. The two logistics guys lifted the heavy green velvet sofa, Chloe's pride and joy, and started carrying it toward the back door. No, not my sofa. Chloe tried to stop them, grabbing one of the movers by the arm. Drop that, you idiots. Ma'am, please don't interfere with our work, the guy said, easily shaking her off. Robert grabbed my arm. His grip wasn't strong. He was shaking. He pulled me slightly aside toward the kitchen, out of Ethan's earshot. Mom, please, he whispered, his eyes watering. I know you're mad, but this is extreme. We can talk. I can talk to Chloe. I'll make her apologize. I'll make her scrub the floor herself. But don't do this to us. You know things aren't great at the firm right now. I don't have the cash flow for a move. I looked him in the eyes. I saw real fear there, but I also saw calculation. He was worried about his comfort, not my dignity. You don't have cash flow, Robert? I asked, dropping my voice to a dangerous whisper. How strange, because according to my math, the commercial space by the old dry cleaner, the one in your name to manage, has been generating $4,000 a month in rent for the past 5 years. Robert turned to stone. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he was going to pass out. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Just a pathetic croak. Yes, son, I know, I continued, thoroughly enjoying watching his mask slip. I know it's leased to the coffee franchise. I know you've been collecting my money while I begged you for cash for my prescriptions, so don't talk to me about cash flow. You have money. My money, Mom. I was going to explain it to you. We invested it in. Don't explain anything to me. I ripped my arm out of his grip in disgust. Save your explanations for your wife when she finds out her rich husband has been stealing from his elderly mother. I walked back into the living room. Chloe was crying hysterically in a corner while the photographer politely asked her to move because she was ruining the shot of the fireplace. Ethan, I called out over the noise. Did you bring what I asked for? Yes, Ruth. It's in the truck. Put it up right now. We all walked out to the front yard. The rain had stopped, but the dirt was still soft. Ethan gave a signal, and one of his assistants hauled over a massive metal sign with bright red letters on a white background. Chloe and Robert stumbled out behind us like sleepwalkers watching a nightmare unfold in real time. The assistant found a soft patch of dirt. He chose, with aim that felt purely divine, the exact dead center of the blue hydrangea bed that Chloe cared for more than her own health. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of the hammer striking the wooden post echoed all the way down Orange Grove Boulevard. 3 solid strikes. The sign stood tall and proud, crushing the flowers beneath its weight. For sale, by owner, unique opportunity. Neighbors started peeking out their windows. The doorman from across the street stepped onto the sidewalk and waved at me, completely stunned. I returned the wave with a dignified, sovereign nod. I turned to my son and daughter-in-law. They were standing on the porch, looking tiny and insignificant in the shadow of my house. "Chloe," I said, pointing at the sign, "now you have real work to do. You need to keep the house spotless for the showings. They start tomorrow at 9, and I highly suggest you clean that mud up in the foyer before the first buyer walks in. They say first impressions are everything." I grabbed my purse, pulled out my sunglasses, and put them on, even though it was overcast. "I'm going to the bank," I announced. "I have to open an account to deposit my money. An individual account. Don't wait up for lunch." I walked down the street, leaving the chaos I had orchestrated behind me. I heard Chloe start screaming at Robert, a high-pitched wail full of accusations, demanding to know what the hell was going on with the dry cleaner's money. I smiled. The bomb had detonated, and I was walking away from the blast radius without a single speck of soot on my tailored suit. The fear had changed sides, and it felt wonderfully good. The for sale sign gleamed under the morning sun like a red wound in my daughter-in-law's perfect garden. Not even 24 hours had passed, and Orange Grove Boulevard already looked like a parade of rubberneckers. Cars slowed down, women walking their dogs stopped to whisper, and, worst of all for Chloe's ego, her friends from the club drove by pretending to look the other way, while their eyes were glued to the metal sign crushing the hydrangeas. I watched it all from the living room window, with a cup of chamomile tea in my hand. The tea was hot, comforting, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to chug it while running to iron a shirt. The house phone wouldn't stop ringing. At first, Chloe ran to answer it, practically ripping the cord out of the wall, screaming that it was a mistake, that the house wasn't for sale, that it was a sick joke played by a senile old woman. But after the 10th call, she simply unplugged it, throwing the receiver onto the sofa in frustration. "This is a nightmare," I heard her mutter, pacing back and forth across the foyer, still in her robe at 11 in the morning. "Robert, do something! Your mother is humiliating us in front of all of Pasadena." Robert was sitting on the stairs with his head in his hands. He looked 10 years older than yesterday. His architect suit, the one he always wore impeccably thanks to my care, looked wrinkled today. He hadn't gone to work. I suppose it's hard to design buildings when the foundation of your own life is crumbling. "I can't do anything, Chloe," he replied, his voice thick. "The house is hers. The paperwork is airtight." "Then have her declared incompetent," she shrieked, spinning toward me with bloodshot eyes. "We say she has dementia." I smiled and took a sip of my tea. "Try it, sweetheart," I said softly. "But I should warn you, Attorney Davis has security footage from the notary's office yesterday showing me perfectly lucid while signing the listing agreement. He also has copies of the bank statements from the commercial property. Do you really want a judge looking into that?" Mentioning the commercial property was like a physical blow. Chloe went totally silent, gasping like a fish out of water. Robert shrank even further into the steps. Just then, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Ethan's professional knock. It was an insistent, anxious ring. I adjusted my shawl over my shoulders and walked to the door. Chloe tried to block my path. "You are not opening that," she hissed. "I am not letting strangers into my house." "Your house," I repeated, savoring the irony. "Chloe, if you don't move, I'll tell the buyers the maid is having a bit of an episode today. And believe me, I have a very convincing face." She hesitated for a second, just long enough for me to turn the knob. When I opened the door, I found a tall, elegant woman dressed in a cream-colored tailored suit that cost more than my daughter-in-law's entire wardrobe. Behind her, Ethan was smiling that shark smile that means he smells fresh blood in the water. "Good morning, Ruth," Ethan greeted. "Please meet Mrs. Patricia Sterling. She is extremely interested in the property. She saw the sign half an hour ago and canceled all her appointments to come down." Mrs. Sterling extended a manicured but firm hand, the hands of a businesswoman, not a trophy wife. "A pleasure, Mrs. Garcia. Ethan tells me you are the sole owner. I love direct deals, no pesky family middlemen." I glanced at Chloe out of the corner of my eye. She was pale, grinding her teeth. Mrs. Sterling didn't even look at her. To her, my daughter-in-law was just part of the furniture. and tacky furniture at that. Come on in, Patricia, I said, stepping aside. Excuse the mess in the entryway. We had a little mud accident yesterday that hasn't quite been cleaned up yet. Chloe let out an indignant huff and ran up the stairs, her heels echoing like the hammer blows of defeat. The walkthrough of the house was a symphony of humiliations for my son and his wife. I guided the buyer, pointing out the architectural virtues, the high ceilings, the cedar wood, the massive windows. Ethan trailed behind, nodding and taking notes. Robert had hidden in the kitchen, incapable of facing reality. When we reached the master bedroom, the door was shut. "This is the master suite," I said, putting my hand on the knob. "It overlooks the garden and has a jacuzzi tub." I tried to open it, but it was locked. "It's occupied!" Chloe screamed from inside. Mrs. Sterling raised an eyebrow, looking at me with curiosity. "I apologize," I said without losing my composure. "The current squatters are a bit territorial, but don't worry, the eviction agreement is part of the sale. They'll be gone before you sign the deed." "Perfect," the buyer said, scanning the hallway with a critical eye. "I was planning on tearing that door down anyway. It's hideous, and that peach paint is awful. Total new money vibe. It needs a complete gut rehab." I had to bite my lip to keep from bursting out laughing. Chloe, who was surely pressed against the door listening, must have been writhing. She had picked out that color and that door personally, bragging to everyone that it was European chic. We went back down to the living room. Mrs. Sterling stopped in front of the fireplace and pulled a checkbook out of her purse. "Mrs. Garcia, I don't like wasting time. The house has good bones, as they say. The location is unbeatable. Ethan told me the asking price. I'll offer you 10% over asking if we close the deal this week, in cash." The silence that followed was thick. Ethan actually stopped breathing for a second. I did the mental math fast. 10% over 2.5 million. That was an extra $250,000. "And the tenants?" I asked. "I'll handle them," the woman said with a coldness I truly admired. "I have a very efficient legal team. If they don't leave the easy way, they'll leave with the sheriff the day I take possession." I held out my hand. "We have a deal." Right then, Robert walked out of the kitchen. He had heard everything. His eyes were red, and he was holding a bottle of whiskey. At 11 in the morning. "Mom, you can't do this," he babbled, completely ignoring the guest. "This is my house. I grew up here." "Well, not here, but this is my life." Mrs. Sterling turned and looked at him with pure disgust. "Sir, I suggest you start packing. And watch that bottle. If you stain the floors, I'll deduct it from the deposit." "Oh, wait, there is no deposit." "Well, I'll just dock it from your mother's final payout." Robert looked at me, searching for the mother who had always saved him, the one who slipped him cash on the sly, the one who made him soup when he was sick. But that mother had gotten permanently stuck in the mud in the foyer yesterday. "You heard her, Robert," I said. "Watch the floors. They're already dirty enough with all the lies told in this house." When Ethan and the buyer left, promising to return with the paperwork the next day, the house fell into a tomb-like silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence right before the final explosion. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one that already had mine tag on it, and pulled out my notepad. Chloe came down the stairs slowly. She wasn't furious anymore. She was terrified. She had changed out of her robe into jeans and a t-shirt, and she had washed off her makeup. She looked young, vulnerable, almost human. She sat on the sofa across from me, actively avoiding looking at the sticky notes marking the furniture as sale or trash. "Ruth," she started, her voice trembling. "Let's talk seriously." "I am being very serious, Chloe. I just sold the house. But where are we going to go? Robert doesn't have any savings." "You know how the economy is." "I know exactly how the economy is, Chloe. I kept the books for a business for 40 years, and I also know that Robert has been collecting $4,000 a month from my commercial property. That is nearly $250,000 over 5 years. Where is that money?" Chloe's eyes went wide as saucers, and she snapped her head toward the kitchen, where Robert was pouring himself another drink. 4,000, she whispered. He told me the space barely covered the property taxes. He told me his city salary was what kept us afloat." I let out a dry laugh. His city salary, Chloe? For God's sake, that salary doesn't even pay for your shoes. You have been living off my rent. You have been eating, traveling, and buying hideous furniture with my money. The useless old woman's money. Chloe stood up and walked toward the kitchen like a robot. I heard a murmur, then a scream, and then the unmistakable sound of a glass shattering against the wall. You liar! Chloe's scream ripped through the air. You told me you were a partner at the firm. You told me the house was yours. You've kept me living a lie. Shut up, Chloe, Robert yelled back. I did it for you, so you could have your luxuries, so you wouldn't leave me for some guy with more money. I stayed in the living room, listening to them tear each other to shreds. It was sad, yes, but it was a necessary sadness, like when you have to re-break a badly healed bone so it sets right. Or, in this case, amputating a gangrenous limb. After a while, the screaming stopped. Robert walked out of the kitchen with a scratch on his cheek. Chloe followed behind him, crying. But this time they were real tears, pure fear. They stood in front of me like two scolded children waiting for their punishment. Mom, Robert said, dropping to his knees in front of my chair. He tried to grab my hands, but I pulled them back. Forgive me. You're right. I'm garbage. But please, don't leave us on the street. I'll pay you back the money. I'll work double shifts. This isn't about the money, Robert, I said, looking at him with pity. It's about dignity. Yesterday, your wife told me I lived here for free, that I had to clean up her mud to earn my food. And you said nothing. You stood there and let her humiliate me. Robert dropped his head. I know. I'm a coward. Yes, you are. And it's my fault for raising you to believe you deserved everything without effort. But that ends now. I pulled a manila envelope from my bag. There are 2 things in here, I said, dropping it onto the coffee table. One is a notice from the bank. I have frozen the joint accounts where the commercial rent was deposited. As of today, that money goes straight into my personal account. Robert groaned. He knew what that meant. Total bankruptcy. His credit cards, his car loans, everything was tied to that cash flow. And the second thing, I continued, is a list of apartments for rent in San Bernardino. They are small, modest walk-ups, but they are dignified. The rent costs exactly what Robert actually makes at the city. Chloe looked at the list in horror. San Bernardino? She shrieked. I am not moving out there. My friends, my club. Your friends already saw the for sale sign, Chloe, I reminded her. Your social status ended the second you decided to step on my dignity with your designer boots. Now you have 2 options. You either move with your husband to a place you can actually afford, or you go find another fool to pay your way. But here, in this house, the hotel is closed. I stood up. My legs felt strong. My hip pain had completely vanished. You have 3 weeks to vacate before Mrs. Sterling takes possession. And I suggest you start selling things. That green sofa, for example. You might get a few bucks for it at the flea market. I walked into the kitchen. I was hungry. I opened the fridge. It was packed with the gourmet food Chloe bought. French cheeses, pâté, wine. I pulled out a pack of Serrano ham and some good Manchego cheese. I grabbed a bottle of red wine Robert was saving for a special occasion. I made myself a plate, poured a glass, and walked back to the dining room. Robert and Chloe were still frozen in the living room, staring at the manila envelope like it was a ticking time bomb. I sat at the head of the table. The yellow sticky note that said, "Mine," was still there. I peeled it off carefully and stuck it right onto my wine glass. Bon appetit, I said loudly, raising my glass toward them. Right then, Chloe's cell phone rang. She had left it on the table. The screen lit up. It was a voicemail playing on speaker, probably activated by mistake, or by fate. It was the voice of Marissa, the president of her gardening club. Chloe, darling, what a shame about the news. People are saying your mother-in-law is selling the house, and that you guys are bankrupt. Oh, honey, no wonder you never paid the full club dues. Listen, we're going to have to ask you to step down as treasurer of the group. You know, for image reasons. Kisses! Chloe's face morphed. It went red, then purple, then chalk white. Social humiliation, the only thing she actually cared about, had finally arrived. She dropped to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, hugging her knees. Robert looked at her, but he didn't move to comfort her. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, I saw respect in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also respect. He finally realized that the old woman cleaning the floors wasn't an antique piece of furniture. She was the pillar holding the roof over their heads, and by pushing me out, they had brought the whole house down on themselves. I ate my ham calmly, savoring every single bite. The wine was delicious. It tasted of oak, red berries, and victory. I looked out the window at the garden. The for sale sign was still there, standing firm. Tomorrow, the moving truck would come to take my things, my real things, my memories, my books, my clothes. They would stay here for 3 more weeks, living out of boxes, watching their fantasy world get dismantled piece by piece. They would have to learn to live with their reality. They would have to learn that mud, when it dries, turns to dust and blows away in the wind. But dignity, that stays. I finished my wine and set the glass on the table with a soft but final clink. Wash the dishes when you're done crying, I told them as I walked toward my bedroom. And please, try to keep the noise down. I have to go tour penthouses tomorrow. Penthouse, maybe, with a view of the park. I closed my bedroom door and turned the lock. I took off my shoes and massaged my feet. I didn't feel lonely. I felt accompanied by myself, by the strong Ruth who had been asleep. I pulled the old Casio calculator out of my purse. I typed in the sale figure plus the recovered interest. The screen showed a beautiful number, but the real value wasn't in those zeros. It was in the silence of the house, a silence that was no longer about submission, but about command. I lay down in bed, smiling in the dark. Outside, I could hear Robert and Chloe arguing in fierce whispers, blaming each other. It wasn't my problem anymore. Their voices sounded distant, like the buzzing of flies that can't reach you anymore. Tomorrow would be the last day of this life, and the first day of the rest of my story. "Good night, boss," I whispered to myself, and for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of dirty laundry. The morning sun steps into my new 10th floor penthouse without asking permission, flooding the living room with a golden light that doesn't have to fight past overgrown trees or heavy green velvet curtains. There is no garden here to turn to mud when it rains. Just a massive terrace with teak decking and a view of the city that looks like a carpet of concrete and hope. I drink my coffee slowly, sitting in a deep blue armchair I bought with my own money, chosen for my own taste, without fear of anyone yelling at me that I'm going to ruin it with my old lady obsessions. Peace has a wonderful sound, you know? It's the jingle of my own keys dropping onto the tempered glass table, knowing nobody else has a copy. It's the soft hum of the refrigerator, stocked with the things I actually like. Greek yogurt, fresh figs, and that bottle of white wine I pop open whenever I feel like it, whether it's a Tuesday or a Sunday. It's been 3 months since I signed the closing papers with Mrs. Sterling. It was the most liberating day of my life. Watching my bank account go from counting pennies to holding a 7-figure balance was like breathing pure oxygen after years underwater. But the best part wasn't the money. It was the feeling that the world finally made sense again. The Pasadena house, with its ghosts and humiliations, doesn't exist for me anymore. That is now Mrs. Sterling's problem and her gut rehabs. I live in Century City, in a building with a private elevator and a doorman who greets me with genuine respect. Not because he expects a tip, but because he knows I own the place. Yesterday, I had to go downtown to sign the final trust documents, and because fate has a very specific sense of humor, I ran into them. I was walking out of the lawyer's office, adjusting my new sunglasses, when I saw a couple arguing at a bus stop. I didn't recognize them at first. He was wearing a suit that was a size too big, shiny at the elbows from wear, and he was carrying a beat-up backpack instead of his Italian leather briefcase. Chloe was a different person. She wasn't wearing those designer boots that left tracks on my life. She was wearing generic sneakers, the kind you buy at a big box store, and her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail with no trace of expensive dye or keratin treatments. They were counting coins for the bus fare. I stopped for a moment, hiding behind a stone column. I could have kept walking. I could have pretended I didn't know them, but curiosity won out. Or maybe it was the need to close the circle. I walked up slowly. When Robert saw me, he went ghost pale. Chloe, on the other hand, just looked down in shame. There was no arrogance left in her eyes, only exhaustion. An old, bone-deep exhaustion that hits you when you finally realize life isn't a runway show. "Hi, Mom," Robert said, his voice cracking. He tried to smile, but it came out as a sad grimace. "Hello, son. Hello, Chloe." We spoke briefly, barely a few minutes. They told me, without making eye contact, that they found a tiny apartment in East Hollywood. A fourth-floor walk-up in an old building that smells like dampness. Robert got a job as a draftsman at a small firm. He isn't the associate architect anymore. Now he's the guy drawing the blueprints nobody else wants to touch. And Chloe is selling baked goods online. "It's hard, Ruth," she told me, looking at her hands. Her nails, once long and acrylic, were cut down to the quick, dusted with flour and chocolate. Kneading tires your arms out so much, and people are so demanding. They want everything cheap and fast. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning. I almost laughed. I wanted to say, "You're tired? Try scrubbing 3,000 square feet of marble on your knees." But I held my tongue. There was no need to kick a man when he's down. Life, that strict teacher I tried to shield them from with my money and my silence, was finally giving them the lessons they skipped during recess. I asked if they needed anything to eat. Robert shook his head, trying to cling to a single ounce of dignity, but Chloe gave a slight nod. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and handed it to her. "For your baking supplies, Chloe, not for luxuries. And keep the change, because money is hard to earn." They just stood there on the sidewalk, watching me get into a secure cab. They didn't look happy, of course not. But for the first time in years, they looked real. They were learning to survive without a host to leech off. And as harsh as it sounds, that was the absolute best thing I could have done for them. Letting them fall so they could learn how to stand back up on their own. But my transformation didn't stop at teaching them a lesson or buying myself nice furniture. With the money from the sale and the back rent I recovered, yes, I collected every last cent Robert hid from me. I felt I had a pending debt. Not with my family, but with my people, with the women who work themselves to the bone and remain invisible. I tracked down the old employees from my dry cleaner, the women who ironed shoulder to shoulder with me for decades, breathing in steam and enduring hellish heat. Many of them were already retired, living on miserable pensions. For two of them, Shirley and Martha, I paid off the mortgages on their modest tract homes. They cried, hugging me right there in the living room of my new penthouse. "You didn't have to do this, Ruth," Shirley told me, wiping her tears with her shawl. "You were always fair, but this is a miracle." "It's not a miracle, Shirley," I replied, pouring her tea into my fine china. "It's justice. You helped me build that wealth. If I eat well, you eat well." And I didn't stop there. With Ethan's help, the real estate kid turned out to be smarter and more honest than he looked. I opened a small trust, the Ruth Foundation. It's nothing massive. I'm not going to be on the cover of philanthropy magazines. It's a small office downtown where we provide free legal counsel to the elderly. I hired 2 young, hungry lawyers fresh out of law school to help grandparents who, like me, signed papers without reading them, or who have contested properties, or who are being financially abused by their own children. Seeing the faces of those people when they get their deeds back, or when they manage to kick out an abusive relative, fills me up more than any luxury banquet ever could. I see myself in them. I see the fear, the shame of admitting your own blood is betraying you, and being able to look them in the eye and say, "You are not alone, and you are not crazy. You have rights," is the best medicine for my soul. I've become somewhat of an urban legend in the neighborhood. They call me the boss of the grandparents. It makes me laugh, but deep down, I love it. Sometimes, when the afternoon fades and the sun paints the city skyline orange, I stare out at the horizon and think about the Ruth from a few months ago, the Ruth who scrubbed mud on her knees, the one who apologized for being in the way. I don't hate her. She breaks my heart a little. I want to time travel, hug her, and say, "Wake up, woman. You are a lioness, sleeping on the cat's mat." She believed that a mother's love meant erasing herself so her children could shine. How wrong she was. For a tree to provide good shade, the trunk has to be solid, not rotting from the inside. If you let yourself be consumed, in the end, You aren't even good for firewood. I learned that dignity cannot be negotiated, not even with blood, and respect isn't asked for with a quiet voice. It is demanded with undeniable actions. My hands still have age spots. Yes, the arthritis visits me on rainy days, reminding me that I am mortal. But my hands no longer smell of bleach and sadness. Now, they smell of expensive lavender cream and the ink from the checks I signed for my own causes. I took my name back. For years, I was the mother-in-law, the grandmother, Arthur's widow. Now, I am Ruth Garcia. Just Ruth. And that name sounds like music to me. I've discovered that solitude isn't a bad thing when you choose it. I have new friends, women my age I met at the park and the foundation. We go to the theater, we drink coffee. We critique novels and laugh about our aches and pains. Nobody competes with anyone. Nobody shows off designer bags. We show off the fact that we can still walk, that our minds are sharp, and that we are the masters of our own time. Tomorrow I leave on a trip. It's not an escape, it's a celebration. I'm going to Santa Fe with this group of friends. We're going to drink mezcal, eat mole, and buy artisan crafts without haggling over a single dollar, paying the artists exactly what they're worth. Because now I know the true value of working with your hands. Before zipping up my suitcase, I went to my desk and opened the top drawer. There, resting on a leather notebook, is my old Casio calculator. The gray, heavy one. I don't need it anymore to count pennies or figure out if I have enough for the gas bill. But I like keeping it close. It's my amulet. It's the reminder that the math of life always balances out in the end, if you just have the courage to press the total key. I look out the window of my penthouse. The lights of Los Angeles are starting to turn on one by one, like millions of tiny stars brought down to earth. Chloe and Robert must be getting back to their walk-up in East Hollywood, exhausted, maybe arguing over what to eat with the little money they have. I hope they find peace. I hope they learn that love is built, not bought. I pour myself the last glass of wine for the night and toast my own reflection in the glass. Cheers, Ruth, I tell myself. You did good. Life doesn't end at 70. Sometimes, it just begins the exact moment you dare to shake the mud off your shoes, grab your purse, and walk with your head held high toward wherever the hell you please. And I, finally, am walking straight toward my own sun.